Let's begin this morning with the major escalation in the war with Iran and fears of a widening conflict. We now know, sadly, the identities of the 2 U.S. soldiers that were tragically killed in the Middle East. The Pentagon has named First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan and Private Isabella Gonzales as 2 of the fallen soldiers, 2 heroes. Those soldiers were killed as a result of an Iranian attack on a military base in Jordan on Friday. A 3rd U.S. service member is still missing in action. The U.S. military says unidentified remains were found at that location. We still do not have a confirmation that it is that MIA soldier. And on Saturday, a U.S. service member was killed over in Iraq during what's described as a controlled detonation of an Iranian drone. As a result, the U.S. has conducted its 9th straight night of strikes against Iran. President Trump says the attacks have been in honor of the soldiers who were killed.
And across the country, as you know, gas and oil prices are surging once again. The national average price for a gallon of regular gasoline is back up to $4. Let's bring in CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who is live from Amman, Jordan. Charlie, let's talk about these attacks over the weekend and how did they unfold?
Yeah, Adriana, we came here as soon as we found out about the U.S. service members who have been killed in attacks here in Jordan, obviously to catch up on some of the reporting. But I have to say, Jordan has seen 4 attacks over the course of 5 days. And we hear about Kuwait and we hear about Bahrain and the attacks on U.S. military facilities there. We haven't really heard that much about Jordan. But the fact is, they don't like to talk about it here. The Jordanian government don't like to talk about it here. But there are U.S. bases here, and they are active, obviously, and they've come under attack. So you asked about the sort of sequence of events. There was a major attack that happened on Friday night, and I had been trying to report that out because I was hearing that it was bad. And our colleagues, James Laporta and others, Ellie Watson, we started calling the Pentagon. We got an impression that it was bad. There were the concussions. Dozens of people were wounded, and we subsequently found out that 2 U.S. service members died. That same exact base was hit again. And why this raises questions is we have seen the robust air defense systems, especially when it comes to U.S. bases, aside from U.S. allies in this region, of intercepting, finding out what's coming in, and then being able to take it out. These missiles and drones were able to attack that base within a 48-hour period twice with accurate precision-guided missiles. So that raises all kinds of questions about whether Iran is exploiting Jordanian air defenses or they figured out some way to pinpoint these attacks on Jordanian bases. So that's what we're going to try to figure out because there are numerous U.S. Military personnel at a couple of bases here in Jordan. And if there's been some exposure of a vulnerability there, we're going to try to figure out what that is.
It's such an important detail, Charlie, because I don't think a lot of Americans realize that there were some 3,000 or so U.S. troops based in Jordan. As you say, most Americans are familiar with our troops in Qatar and in Bahrain. And now we're understanding that these soldiers, these heroes were killed in Jordan and that these forces are spread out across various military bases that are Jordanian. So you're right. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of vulnerabilities are exposed through some of the reporting that you're doing there. And I want to play for you a soundbite because, as you know, some in Congress are continuing to voice their criticism of the conflict. And on Face the Nation yesterday, Sunday, Virginia Senator Mark Warner called the war a, quote, war of choice. Listen to this.
It's remarkable in many ways that we've not had more casualties. We literally have had hundreds of seriously wounded. As a member of the Gang of Eight, I can say unequivocally there was no imminent threat from Iran. You start a war of choice without a plan.
So, Charlie, my question, I guess, is as we've seen the war with Iran continue over the past 4 months or so, the president of the United States indicated to Americans and to the world that this was going to be a quick war. So did the Secretary of Defense. We are now seeing a loss of military lives in this conflict. And as Senator Warner points out, this is a war of choice. Some of the other losses that we faced, for example, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which you covered, as well as even the Benghazi attack on our embassy, those were things that happened in the midst of a military action that was already happening. In other words, there was already conflict in those areas. We weren't at war with those countries, and the war was wrapping up in Afghanistan. How do you make or assess the situation right now as a war of choice, given that we're starting to see some losses on the U.S. side?
Well, Vlad, first of all, whenever there is U.S. blood that is shed in these regions, even though obviously this is a two-way conflict and plenty of Iranian blood has been shed in the fight that's gone on, I think we have to remind our viewers that this started back in February, but what we've seen in the past 9 days consecutively is the United States has returned to a resumption of hostilities, expanding the bombing range along the Strait of Hormuz, trying to break that siege, but also expanding it further into Iran. And Iran has found ways to retaliate. Again, trying to go after Kuwait, trying to go after Bahrain, and then opening this new frontier, which has got the Jordanians really concerned. They're in no position. They don't have the military capacity to even try to take on Iran. The foreign ministry here has summoned the Iranian envoy to say, stop these attacks, halt them immediately. You're putting Jordanian citizens at risk, and that's a red line, because this is not a war between Jordan and Iran. These are U.S. forces here. And I think we really haven't seen it yet. They said there was going to be, the White House said there was going to be a swift response to the loss of these Americans. What we've seen in the past 9 nights has been sort of an escalation, but nothing kind of like the retaliation that the U.S. military is capable of, and that's what we're bracing for now.
Wow. All right. Charlie Daggett reporting from Jordan for us this morning. Charlie, thank you. Appreciate it as always.
CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion joins us now from the White House. Nikole, good morning. Bring us up to date on what the White House is saying about whether there are any chances of renewed negotiations, especially as the attacks have ramped up on both sides.
Yeah, well, to Charlie's point, you know, with these hostilities remaining elevated right now, you know, there doesn't necessarily seem to be an off-ramp, although Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the United States continues to remain open to diplomacy. The president, however, had some pretty harsh criticism for Iran over the weekend. Take a listen.
Iran has been very, very badly damaged. They've lost everything almost militarily. They've got very little left. They've got some missiles. They've got some drones. They've got some manufacturing ability, not much. We control the strait. They don't control anything. So we'll see what happens.
Now, the president also did a pair of interviews over the weekend where he was asked about the memorandum of understanding that the U.S. at one point had with Iran. He said, I couldn't care less. He also told another outlet over the weekend in terms of the deaths of those U.S. service members that they died because they don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. But again, in terms of the Secretary of State who is now traveling overseas to Asia, he did tell reporters, as I mentioned at the top, that the United States remains open to a diplomatic solution, but he said it really depends on Iran and their behavior. He said right now the U.S. is really responding to Iran's behavior, and that's why you're continuing to see these strikes. But he did seem to suggest that on the part of the Iranians, there may be some openness and a willingness to talk, although Iran's president just today said that he believes Iran is in a full-scale war. So again, you know, right now both sides seemingly not on the same page.
So, Nikole, the president is now asking Congress to add Iran to a Russian sanctions bill. Explain that to our viewers. And are lawmakers receptive?
Well, I think it's a little early right now in the sense that the president put out this tweet over the weekend suggesting that Iran be added to this Russia sanctions package. Congress, as you know, just getting back in today. So we haven't had a chance to get much reaction or response to that. But the president pushing this forward, saying that that's what Lindsey wanted to do, suggesting that, of course, the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who was pushing this Russia sanctions package and had just won agreement with the White House on the sanctions package, the president seeming to suggest that this is something that the late senator may have wanted. Now, we do know that in terms of this Russia sanctions bill, it is targeted on just that, sanctioning Russia, increasing tariffs on those who import Russia's crude oil and natural gas. And while there is bipartisan support for this legislation, it is very fragile. So it's unclear whether or not trying to add additional sanctions for Iran would be something that lawmakers would be open to, especially considering many of them, mostly Democrats, aren't necessarily in support of this ongoing war and this ongoing conflict. So the short answer is, Vlad and Adriana, it remains to be seen.
All right. Thank you very much, Nikole. Appreciate it. Earlier on CBS Morning News, our colleague Errol Barnett asked retired Naval Vice Admiral Robert Murrett about the deadly weekend for U.S. forces. He said we may be witnessing the start of yet another new chapter in this conflict.
I think it's pretty clear that we've entered a new phase of the war just with the attacks that we've had for 9 straight days now. It's depending on how you want to count them, it's probably phase 4 of the U.S. and Iranian war. And just the level of attacks kind of as they've been calibrated, but at the same time they have escalated on both sides in terms of the kinds of targets that Iran is striking from our Gulf allies, the U.S. casualties, which are tragic, and then, of course, the types of attacks that we're conducting inside Iran, which have escalated to what we call infrastructure targets, which is a new and expanded set. At the same time, they're being looked at very carefully.
Murrett said it is gratifying to see the Secretary of State is still talking about diplomatic solutions, even though both sides continue trading attacks. But he added that any negotiations at this point are going to entail some very tough talks.